I'll bring this study session to order on Tuesday, August the 14th, 2008, at 5:54 p.m. Today, our study session's topic is KIPP Charter School Application Overview. Dr. Abrego, I will turn the study session over to you.
Thank you so much, Governor President. I'm going to turn it over to our individuals that are leading it. Is it Ms. Sheila Burke and is it Mr. Schultz going to help you? Oh, Sean, okay.
Vice President Thomas, may I approach the bench to hand out some folders?
Yes, please.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Vice President Thomas, distinguished members of the board, Superintendent Abrego. My name is Sheila Burke, and I'm currently serving as the Executive Director of Federal Programs, Intervention Services, and Technology for our school district. I'm joined tonight by our colleagues, Mr. Sean Milner, our Executive Director of Finance and Operations, and Mr. Alex Sanchez, our Manager of Communications. We're here tonight as your district leads regarding our KIPP Charter School application, which is what we're going to present to you tonight. In your folder that I just handed to you, you will find a PowerPoint with tonight's presentation, our Board of Ed policy, a flow chart, a timeline, and we will review these documents tonight along with our objective. Tonight we're going to provide feedback and context on our current Board of Ed policy, LBD, Relations with District Charter Schools, and seek guidance from our Board of Education. To begin, we want to build some background and context. ADAMS 14 is the current authorizer. What this means is that our Board of Education is able to approve a contract to open a new charter school using our Board of Ed policy, LBD, Relations with a Charter School. Traditionally, there are two common schools of thought. Tonight, we're going to look at those two common methods used in school districts, knowing that there are other methods around. First, we're going to look at a side-by-side comparison of the common methods. One is a non-authorizing school district. The other method is an authorizing school district. As I read through, I'm going to compare them side by side. As a non-authorizing school district, that means the state approves the charter. Under an authorizing school district, that means that the local school district approves the charter school. Under a non-authorizing school district, the state has oversight over the charter school. In an authorizing school district, the local charter district has some oversight over the charter. In a non-authorizing school district, charter schools are direct competitors to the local school district. That includes the per pupil funding leaves the district and the charter school's academic performance used to compete with the school district. In an authorizing school district, charter schools are part of the local school district's menu of school options. The per pupil funding stays within the district, and the charter school's academic performance is included in the district's overall performance. In a non-authorizing school district, the charter schools have minimal collaboration with the local school district. In an authorizing school district, the charter and the school district work collaboratively. Furthermore, our policy requires that the administration conduct a thorough quality review of the charter school application to inform the superintendent's recommendation to our Board of Education. This is completed through a district review team process. Policy requires that DAC conducts a formal review and provide a recommendation on the charter school application to the Board of Education. Our Board of Education policy requires that the district provides public engagement opportunities to inform the recommendation and express their opinions directly to the Board of Ed. At a minimum, there are 2 community meetings prior to the Board of Education vote and 1 public hearing prior to the final Board of Education vote. As stated earlier, part of our objective tonight is to seek guidance On our Board of Education policy, LBD, relations with district charter schools, to support the charter school application we received from KIP. And we have some of our KIP members here tonight. Adams 14 received an application on July 12th from KIP Charter School. As per Board of Ed policy LBD, the board has 90 days to consider and take action on the KIP Charter School application. And in a second, we'll go through the flow chart that I've included for you. October 10th, 2018 is the deadline for the Board of Ed to take action under the current policy unless an extension to the timeline is mutually agreed upon by both parties. In your folder, I've placed a timeline on white paper. This, similar to the one that we have up here. The timeline follows our Board of Ed policy, LBD-R. In your folder, I'm going to direct your attention to specific areas in our Board of Education policy that help to shape our timeline that we're going to review tonight. So behind your presentation is our Board of Education policy. I've tabbed the page that I'm going to reference, so it's easier for you to find. So at the beginning of our policy, it talks about the process that any charter school seeking applications for our district need to follow, and KIP has already provided that. The part I'm going to direct you to is the middle section of here, which is the review by the District Accountability Committee, the review by our Board of Education, our public meetings, and then decision on the district charter school application. So the District Accountability Committee, or our DAC, shall review an application before submission to the board. The board policy outlines what our committee should be included of. They'll have 15 days to review the application prior to the board review. And then under the Board of Education, the board will not accept or consider incomplete applications, and we have worked with KIP to make sure that their application is complete. On the bottom of that review of the board, the last line talks about the parties may mutually agree to waive any deadlines during the application process, including extending the deadline for board consideration of the application. That extension would be a 30-day extension. Below that, you'll have the guidance under our public meetings, and we will include those in our timeline, as well as the decision on the charter school application. And again, the board will be able to approve with conditions, or deny the district charter school application. So using this policy, we then began to outline the timeline that you'll see inside of your folder, which is on the white paper. I'm also going to reference you back to your red folder. I have also included a flow chart that takes all the information from our Board of Ed policy and has condensed it into an easier format to read and follow. We are currently under the blue section, and I've put a pink star at the top of the step that we're currently on, which is the comprehensive review, the public notice and meetings, followed by the action step by the Board of Education. And our timeline that we have proposed for you is all conducive of that 90-day timeline. From the time KIP has turned in their application, 90 days past that, which ends on October 9th, 2018. Within the current timeline, we'd like to propose some factors for our Board of Education to consider. Regarding our timeline, as mentioned in our objective tonight, we will seek your guidance from you at the end. Things to consider are barriers for Adams 14 with the current timeline that's in the 90 days as outlined by our Board of Ed policy. There's not enough time to allow for quality thorough review by Adams 14 of their application. There's not enough time to allow for quality and thorough review by our DAC committee. And there's not enough time to effectively engage our Adams 14 community in our process. An option to address the barriers around the timeline could be to consider a 30-day extension should both parties agree, as allowed in Board Policy LBD. The last item that you're going to find in your folder is going to be a pink timeline that we'll seek your guidance on at the end of our presentation. That includes our 30-day extension, with our end date in making a decision from the Board of Education on November 13th, 2018. Tonight we are here to seek guidance from you as our governing board. What we're looking for is guidance on, we have outlined in 2 questions. One being, does the Board of Education want to consider an extension to the timeline? And if so, administration would work with KIPP to negotiate an agreed timeline extension and present that to our Board of Education for action on August 28th, 2018. The second item that we're looking for guidance on is, does the Board of Education have any guidance regarding the process and the timeline? Topics the Board of Ed would like to request for upcoming study sessions. The Board of Ed will have 4 study session opportunities with the 90-day timeline, or the board will have 7 study session opportunities with an extension to that timeline. The topics may include, but are not limited to, best practices for authorizing school districts, new school development models and processes, and others that you provide to us that you would like to know more about. The other part that we would seek guidance on is community engagement, the processes, and what you'd like that to look like. We want to thank you for your time tonight and see if there's any questions that you have for us, and then determine how you'd like to provide information to us on the guidance that we're seeking.
Yes, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Burke, thank you for the presentation, for the work that I know you and many others on staff have put into the initial review of the application and working with KIPP to make sure that it's complete and thorough. You had mentioned that under the extended timeline, the board has more opportunities for study sessions to more in-depth explore the application, alternatives, any potential conditions, all of those things. Under the extended timeline, are there also more opportunities for community engagement?
Yes, and you'll see that outlined in our timeline. And if we have further questions, I'm going to refer those to Mr. Alex Sanchez because he was able to help prepare us with our timeline.
Thank you, Senator Moreno, Mr. Vice President, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent. The proposed timeline you see, in short, the 90-day, which is following your current board policy, that timeline only allows for 2 community meetings. That's the minimum under your policy. We could do more, but the minimum will be two community meetings. The challenging part with the 90-day timeline is the fact that we're starting school this Thursday, and literally we would have to start the first community meeting next week on the 22nd, which it does not give a fair and ample opportunity for our families to even get back into our school systems, get back engaged, and then come in and provide input. The extended timeline allows us to move the dates a little further up with the end date of November 13th, which would allow for us to do a better job at reaching families, at promoting these meetings to make sure we get more people and more quality dialogue at these community meetings. Both the 90-day timeline and the extended timeline both include at a minimum 2 community meetings. They're just moving the dates forward. The extended timeline does include more study sessions. It does include more opportunities for the internal district review team that must literally review every part of the application. And it also allows your DAC more opportunities to meet, because the 90-day timeline does push the DAC literally to meet every single week for the next 3 weeks in order to try to consume an application that is literally this thick of documents. And we still need to translate those documents in a language that all members of your DAC can consume and understand. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions or a comment. One's fairly pedestrian. I would just simply like to know, right now the schedule shows August 22nd as the DAC meeting. And I just would, will that be published in terms of the time and the place? And not that we have to have it for the entire schedule, but if we could have it for the next week or two, and then as we move forward, roll forward, we continue to have those times and places offered. My substantive comment has to do with the board's trying to come to grips with some of the issues that we face. And I met last week with staff at CSI, and they were extremely helpful in terms of telling me what services, what information they could provide members of the board. And I would like to schedule them, and I think they will make every effort possible to be here and to look into two areas. One is governance, the second is financial impact. And we've been inquiring for several months about the nuts and bolts of the impact that this will have on the district. And we haven't really turned up any information so far, except for some of the more general stuff. But I understand that CSI would be happy to look at the KIP application and to go through that in terms of the Adams 14 tax base and so forth, and actually crank the numbers so that we as a board know what kind of an impact this would have on us. And specifically, I'm talking about whether we authorize it through the local district or whether KIP were to be authorized through CSI. The similar debate, I think, should occur regarding governance. And is the district, is the board equipped to be conscientious in its governance role if KIP were to be authorized through Adams 14? And again, I think CSI could help us look at the specifics in terms of what's our responsibility as a governing agency for a charter school. And then at some point, so I think that would be, I would like to see a study session where CSI comes in prepared to give answers to those kinds of questions, and then perhaps further down the line to have KIP come in and give us their perspective on some of these same issues.
Dr. Hyde, did you want me to have Mr. Sanchez address your questions that you had around DAC and the publication around that?
If you have the times and places now, okay, or if you just want to send them out in an email. I'm not trying to, we don't need to gobble up a bunch of time if you have them and can disseminate them to the public at large. It'd be nice to have them.
Thank you, Dr. Hyde, Mr. Vice President, members of the board, and Mr. Superintendent. That's a great point. I know that as soon as we get guidance from the school board, and should you guide us to negotiate an extended timeline with KIP, then that's when we can start putting a lot more details. But as soon as it's a final timeline, as soon as we agree that it's a final timeline, then we will want to push that out to all communities, to all school communities, and to the public to make sure they know exactly where it is, what time it is, and how to get engaged in this process. We want as much engagement in any decision you make as a school board. Thank you.
I want to say thank you. Y'all did a great job with the presentation and the paperwork. But I think I'm looking at the pink sheet, the timeline, and it's saying in bold, the regular board meeting, approve extension and KIP application. That's on the 28th. And right above it, saying board study session, the 28th too. I believe that should be moved up a week ahead of time, personally, because that would give the board time enough to look at all this, for us to go a week to look at things before we vote. You're asking us to do a study session like we're doing now in 15 minutes in an hour to vote on the extension. Should we do an application extension? That's rushing us again, and I believe I brought that up several times about being rushed. So I'm saying personally, we should have a week. It's the 2-week gap from today that things should, y'all doing an outstanding job, but I'm sure y'all can update us on the process of what y'all doing in next week, because if we was doing the Thursdays board sessions like we was doing previously, y'all could knock that out for us in less than an hour, 45 minutes, and call it a night. So I think that should be done next week sometimes, you know. We can ask Madam Chair how she feels, see what we can do. I mean, but that have to be talked about with the other board members, see how their schedule is. But I personally feel you're doing it right before a board meeting, you rushing us again. But I just want to say y'all did a great job, and thank you for what y'all done. Thank you.
Thank you. So please know that we're going to operate under the white timeline, which is the 90-day timeline, unless you give us guidance whenever you provide that to Dr. Abrego and or Monica. At that time, if you determine that as a governing board you would like us to proceed with a 90-day extension, then that's when we'll begin to work with KIP to see if they also mutually agree. And that's when we'll look at the tentative dates that we have there. In the meantime, we'll begin to operate under the white timeline to make sure that we meet our deadlines.
Mr. Vice President, if I may, just want to highlight that if we are to operate with the 90-day timeline, as your policy states, it implies that we have to start promoting meetings, and we need to start calling in administrators and teachers into the review process, which will take them away from their day-to-day jobs because we don't have the luxury of time. And so I think we're here seeking guidance to know either way, should we begin to negotiate an extended timeline and bring that back to the board if based on your wish, whether it's in a different study session or for formal action. But otherwise, the school district has to meet your policy, which means we have to start communicating process as we know it today, which implies renting locations or confirming locations for community meetings and starting to set times, locations, and dates to your current 90-day process.
So, Mr. Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think there's a lot of benefits to an extended timeline. I think it allows for more authentic and widespread community engagement in this process. I think it would allow for the DAC to conduct a more thorough review of the application. And as Dr. Hyde stated, I think it allows us to engage a broader array of stakeholders in this work. So whether that's CSI, whether that's the League of Charter Schools, I think it would provide an opportunity for the DAC to even visit a KIPP school if they deemed so appropriate. So it's certainly my preference that we seek an extended timeline. And if I may suggest, I mean, an extension of the timeline must be mutually agreed upon. So if I may be so bold to suggest that I think we should engage KIPP and ask them what they'd like to see in an extended timeline as well. I think that's important, and I know that they would value authentic community engagement as well through the design school meetings that they've already been doing in the community. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr.
And I just want to make sure that, thank you again for the presentation, but you're seeking guidance from the board. How soon do you need that decision? Are you anticipating trying to get that today, or can it be tomorrow, or what are your wishes, or what are we?
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Vice President, members of the board. The sooner the better, right? So today is your study session to be able to give us your guidance as the governing body to let us know whether we should continue to broker a negotiated timeline with KIP and then bring it back to you at your next available meeting, whether it's in a study session and for formal action and/or just a study session if you want to review that information before you take action on just extending a mutually agreed timeline. Again, the more that we delay, we're still under your clock, under your current policy of 90 days, and we can't communicate and promote engagement and dates and times until we have a final timeline that we can promote to your community.
Oh.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Minister.
would it be appropriate for us, we do have representation from KIP here this evening, and not to put you on the spot, or to put you on the spot, are you at liberty or feel comfortable addressing the question that we've raised here this evening?
Yes, please, come to the dais.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you who I have not met, I'm Kimberly Sia. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for KIP Colorado Schools. And to answer Dr. Hyde's question, we have been made aware that this conversation was going to be presented to the board this evening, and we have called together our board as well to discuss this as a conversation as well. So we are more than willing to entertain this. We appreciate the opportunity to be partners in this work and to really be thoughtful about how we're engaging in this process as we go along. And so once we heard the decision that was made hopefully this evening, we will then take that back to our team as well and go through the similar process on our side. And understanding that there's a sense of urgency in making sure that we get this decision made sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Mr. Rowland?
Yeah, my question is, you're asking, or if we should ask for an extension, how many extra days do we get on the extension?
Thank you, Mr. Rolla. You would get 30 days in your extension, so approximately 1 month.
All right. So we have to come up with a consensus from the four of us. And I'm going to start with you, Mr. Rowland. How do you feel about the,
I'm for extension.
Mr. Moreno?
I'd like to pursue an extension.
Dr. Hyde? Same. Myself, will you please continue with KIP with a 4-0 extension for the extra 30 days, please?
Thank you for the guidance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, members of the board. So we've taken note of that. We will proceed with KIP, the applicant, to be able to see if we can mutually agree on an extended timeline and bring that information back to you in a study session, and then in the regular agenda planning meeting with the Vice President and the President, we will schedule the right action item whenever it is the will of the school board. The second guiding question that we have for you is, should you have any additional feedback or input for us as we're developing the timeline and process around community engagement. So we've heard already from several members of the board about some ideas, whether it's, the DAC potentially coming to or going to visit a specific, KIP school, potentially, and then we've heard also feedback from you around some of the topics in the study sessions and some of the guests that we could invite to have you, the school board, deliberate and learn about some of these topics. Is there anything else that the board would like us to include in your process and timeline?
Mr. Moreno?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sanchez, the only thing that I would add is it looks like whether we operate on the extended timeline, which hopefully we will, or the condensed timeline, that there is a community engagement session before the DAC recommendation and then after. I think that makes a lot of sense. If we could build in more community engagement, I would certainly welcome that. But if that's not possible, given the timeline, I would suggest that we put as many resources and as much effort as possible in engaging as broad of a swath of the community as possible.
Thank you.
Also, I'd like to add that the board should give you at least 72 hours if we decide to send an email if we have questions, like not right now, but within 72 hours. If you don't receive an email from the board within 72 hours, go with the recommendations you got from the board as of today and just move forward.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. If you have any other questions later, please make sure you forward them to Dr. Abrego, and we'll make sure that we work on those.
Thank you.
And we'll move forward with the recommendations you provided to us tonight.
Thank you. We will take a 5-minute break and come back and start the board meeting. Thank you.